We're continuing our discussion on the historical evidence for the existence of God. Yeah, we're going to conclude that God exists by doing good history. Now, this is in a roundabout way by first showing that the resurrection of Jesus isn't something that you just have to believe based on a blind faith. No, we have really good reasons, historical reasons, to believe that Jesus actually rose from the dead. That is, that the resurrection of Jesus was a real event in history. So, let's go over the argument that I offered in the previous lesson. The argument goes like this. It's called the historical argument for the existence of God. Premise 1. There are certain facts about Jesus that need an explanation. Premise 2. The best explanation of these facts is that God raised Jesus from the dead. Premise 3. If God raised Jesus from the dead, then God exists. Conclusion, step 4, therefore, God exists. So, this argument is valid, but are the premises or the steps all true? Well, this argument hinges on facts, what we call historical facts. And we examined 6 of these facts in our previous lesson. Let's go through those again also. First, let me just preface that a historical fact is something that the vast majority of trained scholars and historians and from atheists to Christians and everybody in between, if you're a trained scholar or historian or a New Testament expert, any writings of antiquity, whatever your field is, it's all these guys, all these men and women who are trained experts in the field. And when you take all of them, you see that the vast majority of them all agree that these things are factual when it comes to history. That's why we call them historical facts. So, really quickly, let's go through the 6 from the previous lesson. Fact number 1. There was a Jewish man called Jesus who lived in Israel around AD 30. That's not contested. Sure, you've got some fringe lunatics out there that will contest it, but the vast majority of the experts and scholars in this field agree that Jesus existed in Israel around AD 30. Fact number 2. Jesus thought he was special, and we know that through what he said and what he did. Right? Jesus thought there was something special about him. Fact number 3. Jesus had a number of disciples, men and women followers, who were Jews. And this is how the church grew. Fact number 4. Jesus was crucified as a criminal by the Roman authorities, and he died on the cross. Fact number 5. Jesus' body was buried in a tomb in Jerusalem. And fact number 6, some of Jesus' women disciples, A, said they discovered his empty tomb, and B, said they saw the risen Jesus. So those are the 6 facts we've examined so far, and if you'd like to hear why these are facts, go back to the previous episode, watch that video. Now let's continue looking at more facts. So far, we've looked at 6. Here's the 7th. Jesus' male disciples they really believed that Jesus had really risen from the dead. And so really was the Son of God, the Messiah. And they were willing to die for this belief. Okay, so it's important to note that these scholars, even the atheists who are scholars here, they're not saying that Jesus really did rise from the dead. They're just saying that it's a historical fact that his disciples really did believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Okay? We'll discuss that more soon. But that is, they believed that, or the scholars would say that the disciples said they really saw him and touched him, and they ate with him. They experienced Jesus with their five senses. They thought they saw him at many different times and places. And they kept preaching that Jesus was risen, even though it was really dangerous to do so. I mean, they had many enemies back then. Many Jews and their leaders who wanted to shut them up. I mean, they were opposed to free speech, right? They did not want this free speech. They wanted to shut them up. They'd already killed Jesus, and it was dangerous for his followers, especially if you're going to keep preaching about Jesus. It was really dangerous, and they wanted to silence them. And after some years, the Roman government also began to persecute Christians. For example, do some research on the Emperor Nero, right? So it was very dangerous. It was like, imagine if you're a Christian today in Pakistan or, I don't know, some Middle East hardcore Muslim nation where if you speak against Allah or Muhammad, I mean, they will kill you, right? If you say that Jesus is God, they will cut your head off. I mean, imagine living in that kind of a culture. It was very dangerous for the disciples to keep preaching about Jesus in this culture back then. Now, some disciples did die for their beliefs. For example, James, the brother of John, and James, the brother of Jesus. And actually, we know about James, the brother of Jesus, and how he died, not from the Bible or any other Christian writings, but from extra-biblical sources written by non-Christians. So, and we have good reason to believe that Peter was executed for his belief. For more on this, I encourage you to get Sean McDowell's book. I think it's called The Fate of the Disciples. It's actually his PhD dissertation. Really encourage you to get his book and to look at all the historical research he did on the fate of the disciples. Now, people started worshiping Jesus because the disciples first said they saw him, not the other way around. All right, so let's look at fact number 8. There was a Pharisee. The Pharisees were the group of people that had Jesus killed, okay? So in this group now, there's a Pharisee named Saul, who later came to be known as Paul. And now Saul persecuted the Christians at the time. This is after the crucifixion, when Jesus isn't around anymore, okay? But all the disciples are telling people that Jesus was raised from the dead. And so Paul was I should say Saul, the Christian hunter, right? He would hunt down the Christians. He would arrest them and possibly even have them executed. He was the Christian hunter who persecuted followers of Christ. But suddenly, and out of seemingly nowhere, Saul changed. Saul became Paul. And he stopped hunting down Christians to persecute them. And all of a sudden just said, hey, I'm going to join that team. Right? I'm going to join the very people I'm trying to persecute. The people I'm trying to kill, well, now I'm going to go join those people so others can try to kill me too. What? Why would he do such a thing? Paul suddenly changed his mind and became a Christian for the rest of his life. Why? Well, it's because Paul said that he saw and experienced the risen Jesus. He saw Jesus, he says, and believed that Jesus rose from the dead. That's why he changed. And this is recognized as a historical fact. Again, not all the scholars are going to say that Paul or Saul really did see Jesus, the risen Jesus, and then became Paul. But they will say that Saul really thought he had experienced the risen Jesus and then transformed into Paul, the Jesus follower named Paul. So, because of this, Paul was willing to die for Jesus, and he did. All right. Now, facts 6, 7, and 8 need an explanation. Why did these odd things happen? Now, to do this, we've got to tell a story. We've got to tell a story that makes sense of all of these facts, these historical facts. And it's not just any old story. No, this story needs to be coherent. It needs to make sense. So this is what part of the historical method is all about. You take the facts, and then you try to... It's like being a detective, really. So let's be good detectives right now. Let's put on our detective hats, get our magnifying glasses out, and examine the data. You know, this reminds me of James Warner Wallace. He is recognized as one of the greatest detectives in our nation, probably in the world today. He solves these cold cases, these cold case murders. And he does this by looking at all the facts. And then he puts together a reasonable story showing what probably really did happen. So, this is part of the historical method. And so, step one was just understanding the facts. Now let's discuss step two. That is, how do we explain these facts? All right, I've got the facts up here on the board. I hope you can see them. Right? And so the question is raised, why did the women say they found Jesus' tomb empty? I mean, it's a historical fact that the women said they found the tomb of Jesus empty. Well, we're going to look at some options here. Here's the other one. Why did the disciples think and behave the way they did? We're going to look at that. And then why did Saul become Paul? Why are all these things going on? We have to create a story. We have to put these pieces together and make a coherent story that makes sense of all the data. All right, what's some options here that would make sense of why the women said they found Jesus' tomb empty? Well, one, it could just be because they were confused. People get confused all the time. So that could be an option. Perhaps it was they were lying, right? They wanted to deceive people. We know people can lie, so that's a possibility. It's also possible that, hey, they just went to the wrong tomb. There must have been lots of tombs like this around the town, and they just went to the wrong place. They went to the wrong address. I've done that before. Not a big deal. Or it could be that the tomb really was empty. You got to consider that. All right, well, those are some options to consider. We put all those on the table. And let's move on to the next one. Why did the disciples think and behave the way they did? Good question. Well, let's think of the most plausible possible answers. All right, one, they just really wanted it to be true. They really wanted to believe in Jesus, and that's it. All right, we'll consider that. Well, what about two? They were also lying, just like those women. Just a big lie. Or three, Jesus never really died. Right? He might have got beat up, might have been crucified, but he survived it somehow. It's a possibility. All right, the next one. Well, somebody tricked them. They got fooled. Right? Pranksters. Got punked. Oh, this one. They were hallucinating, right? Have you ever had a hallucination? Right? I mean, some of you, probably have more than others. Don't know why. But, I can think of an easy one. On a hot summer day, you're driving down the highway or the interstate, and it looks like there's water up there. I remember when I was a little kid, my mom said, "Hey, Tim," we were in our VW bus going down the highway. Big red VW bus back in the late 70s probably. And she's like, "Tim, look at all that water up there." I was like, "Whoa, why is it so wet up there?" And we got, I thought we were getting closer and closer, but the water never got closer and closer. And then pretty soon she told me, "Hey, this is an illusion." Well, it's kind of like a hallucination. Maybe not exactly the same thing, but, our eyes can fool us, right? Well, maybe they just hallucinated and they all thought they saw Jesus, but they didn't really see him. All right, that's something to consider. Well, finally, the other option is, they were right. Jesus really did rise from the dead. They saw the resurrected Jesus and experienced him. You got to consider that as a possible option. All right. Why did Saul behave the way he did? That is to say, why did Saul become Paul? Well, let's consider those options. Saul was stupid. Okay, maybe that's one. Or Saul was lying. You got to consider that. Or 3, some other Christians tricked Saul. They punked Saul. They got him good. Or 4, well, Saul just felt really guilty, right? He'd been persecuting these poor Christians, hunting them down, arresting them, torturing them. Some of them were getting killed. And all of a sudden, he just felt this tremendous guilt. And because he was feeling so much guilt, just thought, gosh, I better go join that team so I can get persecuted too. All right, let's consider that. Or here's the hallucination again. Maybe that happened to Paul too, right? Just like everybody else is having these hallucinations of Jesus. Well, join the club, Paul. Have a hallucination of yourself. Possible. Or finally, Saul really did see Jesus, the resurrected Jesus, just as he claimed. And that's why Saul became Paul. Well, let's consider these things. Now, we can pick one or more options from each part and try to tell a story. And these are most of the options that people, non-Christians and Christians, have thought about over the years. And when I say over the years, I'm really talking about the last 2,000 years or so. But these are really the majority of the options that people offer. Now, we can make up lots of stories to try to fit these facts together. Some of these stories will be much more believable than others. And many stories are possible. But we want a story that's not just possible, not just possibly true. We want a story that seems probably true. You see, possibilities come cheap, but probabilities, those are much more expensive. Well, next, we're going to try to cross out some of these more unbelievable stories, these hard-to-believe options. So again, let's put on our detective hat like J. Warner Wallace and examine the data, examine the evidence, examine the clues, and try to put together the most believable story. Well, we saw that to tell a story, a coherent story, regarding facts 6, 7, and 8, or at least that's the job, what we're trying to do. We're trying to tell a coherent story that makes sense of all these facts on the board behind me. To do this, we can choose from some options to explain each fact and then try to make a story. Now, a story might be good at explaining one fact, but terrible at explaining the others. And there are many options, but we now eliminate some of them as more unbelievable than others. This is regarding the inference to the best explanation, a story that explains all the facts. Now, you just consider, we gave you many facts. We're just looking at 3 right now. But if you look at these facts, let's say, well, we can tell a story that explains this. And so you pick, say you pick number 2 here. And you try to tell a story about why it was that the women said the tomb was empty. And you just say, well, it's because they're lying. Well, that makes sense of this. But when you start trying to use that explanation for this one, does that make sense? We're going to look at why it doesn't, and especially when we get into this one. Is that going to really make good sense? We'll continue. Hang with me here. So you might have a story that explains one fact, but if it doesn't explain the other 2, it's not really a good explanation. Maybe you've got a story that explains 2 of the 3 facts. Well, hey, that's a better explanation than the one that only explains one fact. But if it doesn't explain all the facts, then it's not going to be as good as a story or an explanation that can explain all the facts. If you have an explanation that can explain all the facts, then that's the inference to the best explanation. So let's continue. Let's look at fact number 6. Why did the women say they found Jesus' tomb empty? Well, a story that does not use number 4, the empty tomb, is going to be really hard to believe. If there was any dead body in the tomb, it would be really hard to explain facts 6 and 7. Think about it. If the tomb was not empty, how would you explain these two? If there was not a dead body in the tomb, then those other two don't make sense. For a Jew back in that day, the idea of resurrection obviously meant the body was not dead anymore. That's how you got to go back to their time and what a Jew would believe in that time. And for resurrection, they believed that meant the body was not dead. So, how could the disciples, 1, get the idea that Jesus was resurrected, and 2, expect anyone to believe them, and 3, be willing to die for this? That's not a good explanation. Someone must have gone to the tomb and checked. Now, I'll tell you what, if I went to somebody's funeral, and then 2-3 days later, people are telling me that same person who I saw get buried in the ground is now walking around town, and I haven't seen them myself, I'll tell you what, even if I did see them, I'd want to go to the tomb, or the grave, right? I want to go to the cemetery where I saw them buried, and I want to go see if there's a body in that coffin, in that gravesite. I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but that's the first thing I would want to do. And why would anyone want to invent this story unless it actually happened? And I said it, I think last time, people back then also didn't think that women were good witnesses, and there were at least 5 women reported to have gone to the tomb. It would have been easy to see if the tomb still had a body in it. So it's hard to believe that they were just confused. There was no reason for them to lie, and no one else would have believed them anyway. If they went to the wrong tomb, other disciples and enemies would definitely have said so. I mean, that's what I would have done if I was one of their enemies. If somebody starts, if I was on the other team, so to speak, if I was one of the Pharisees, and I saw these people who were following Jesus, we just killed Jesus, and now they're running around town saying that Jesus is not dead, that we failed in our mission to kill Jesus. First thing I'm going to go do is show them that dead body. Again, not the sharpest tool in the shed, but that's the first thing I'd do. All right, let's discuss fact number 8. Why did Saul become Paul? Why did Saul behave the way he did? Now, any story that that uses 1, 2, 3, or 4 is going to be really hard to believe. Saul was not stupid. He was an intelligent and educated Pharisee. He wouldn't change his mind just for no reason. There's absolutely no reason for him to lie either. He was fiercely persecuting the Christians. Why would he just change his mind all of a sudden? In those days, it was really dangerous to be a Christian. 1, there were not many Christians in the first place, and 2, most Jews rejected them and thought they were shameful, and so did Saul, I should say, before he became Paul. There was no way Christians could have found a way to trick Saul into joining them either. I mean, I don't want to say no way, but it seems really hard to believe that you could punk Saul and trick him like that. There's also no reason to think that Saul felt guilty, right? He really believed in what he was doing, right? He thought that Jesus was a false Messiah that deserved to be executed, and that they demonstrated that he was false, that he was a fake, by killing him. and now he's got a few of his disciples running around saying he's not dead. Well, he wants to destroy this budding cult, if you will, this cult of Judaism, and he wants to destroy this thing. He's going after him. He believed what they were doing was wrong. He believed what he was doing was the right thing by hunting down Christians. Also, option 5, the hallucination option, is hard to believe. But we're not going to cross it out just yet. I'm going to spend some more time on it later. But, just in passing right now, just let me say this. There's no other example that we know of where a vicious enemy has, 1, had a hallucination, 2, then suddenly decides to go to the other side because of this hallucination, and then 3, becomes willing to die for this hallucination. So we need a better explanation. Now, I just watched a debate last night between Mike Licona and Bart Ehrman, and I believe that I think Bart in the debate last night actually said that he believes that all these people really believed that they saw the risen Jesus. He says it's a historical fact, but he says they were just hallucinating. Is that a good explanation? Well, we're going to continue talking about that. Let's look at fact number 7. Why did the disciples think and behave the way they did? That's a good question. Why did they do that? Well, let's look at a story. Let's try to make a story here using option 1. They really wanted this to be true, okay? So Jesus didn't really rise from the dead. There's nothing special about why the disciples did what they did. They just wanted to believe so much in Jesus. Actually, they wanted to believe in Jesus' teachings. They loved his teachings. They wanted those teachings to be true. So much so that they were willing to die for it. Like suicide bombers also die all the time for what they believe in today. Well, this does not explain fact 7 or the other facts. The disciples said they really saw and met Jesus alive. This is what they were willing to die for, not the teachings of Jesus. They weren't willing to die for Jesus' teachings. They were willing to die for the fact that they said, hey, he was dead and now he's alive. That's what they were willing to die for. Not just Jesus' teachings. And they had to have very good reasons to do what they did. Now let's try to use a story using option 2 here. And they would say this. Jesus didn't really rise from the dead, and the disciples knew it. But some or all of them stole Jesus' body. And after that, well, that's why they behaved the way they did. Well, this story, this option, this story explains fact 6, but it's terrible at explaining 7 or even 8. Why would anyone be willing to die for a lie? Especially if you know it's a lie. I mean, at least the Islamic terrorists that blow themselves up or fly airplanes into buildings today, they sacrifice themselves. They're willing to die for a lie, but it's a lie they really believe is true. But there's something different about the disciples here. They would be in a position to know if this was a lie or not, unlike modern day terrorists. So there's a big difference here. So why would anyone be willing to die for a lie, especially if you know it's a lie? The disciples must have believed they really saw Jesus. That's a better explanation. The disciples knew what they did was very dangerous, but they kept on doing it. Even though, 1, they knew not many would believe him anyway, and 2, some of them had been killed for it. And it was likely that they would be killed for what they were testifying to as well. Well, let's use a story using option 3 here. Let's try to make sense of this. And some have said this. Well, Jesus never actually died, they say. He just woke up in the tomb. He survived the crucifixion, maybe barely, but then they put him in the tomb and he survived and he got out. And when the disciples then saw him, well, they were amazed. And they did what they did in fact 7 then, because they were amazed that Jesus survived. No one thinks that this is a good explanation these days. Some people did around 200 years ago. This was really purported and offered as a way to make sense of these historical, of this fact, apart from the resurrection. So no scholar really believes this today. Now, tell that to some internet atheists who don't seem to have received that memo yet. But and so I still, in my interaction with atheists online and on the college campus, I'll still hear uninformed atheists, if you will, try to offer this as an explanation. But no scholar holds this today. The Romans were very good at executing criminals. Execution was like an art form to them. They had it down to a science. So Jesus never could have survived. Nobody really thinks he could have survived. Now, even if he did, think about the mess that Jesus' body would have been in. Anybody that has seen Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ, I mean, just think about the mess that Jesus' body was in. I mean, he was beaten to a pulp. If he wasn't crucified on the cross, he would have probably eventually died just from the beating he took before he got to the cross. It was amazing what the Romans would do, the executioners of the day. They had execution down to a science, and they were proud of their work, and they took it seriously. But even if Jesus survived the cross somehow, his body would have been an utter mess, to put it lightly. The disciples would never have believed that Jesus really resurrected from the dead and therefore worshipped him, or be willing to die to tell people about. I mean, think about this. First of all, if anything, they wouldn't be going out telling people, risking their lives to tell people that Jesus rose from the dead. No, they'd be looking for a doctor. And imagine if somehow Jesus survived and woke up in the tomb and somehow rolled the stone away on his own. I mean, think about that. You're beat down by the Roman executioners. Your wrists and your feet are pierced, and somehow you survive the crucifixion. Which, seems very unlikely. But somehow you survive, and then you throw him, and due to the coolness of the tomb, without any food or water, that coolness of the tomb revives him. Man, why do we even have hospitals today? Just throw people in cool tombs. They'll be all right in 3 days. Now, so imagine that Jesus somehow survives, rolls the stone away, and then starts walking back into town, he's got to hurt. I can't imagine what that feels like. And nobody sees him walking through town, but eventually he gets to where the disciples are hanging out, knocks on the door, that's got to hurt. And then they open the door and they see Jesus, this mess, he looks like a zombie, and would Jesus say, "Here, touch this and see that I've been raised"? Or when they touch it, I can see him say, "Ouch, that hurts." Right? I can't remember who first, was it Mike Lacona who first said that? I can't remember. It's not mine, didn't make that up. But, they're not going to worship this guy. They're going to be like, "Wow, crazy that you survived, Jesus. Now let's hide you so they don't kill you. And man, let's be quiet ourselves because look what they did to you. I don't want that happening to me." Right? So they're not going to go out and share this in the streets. Right? They're going to be quiet. Yeah, it would have been basically a miracle that he survived. But you're not going to go out and tell people that he rose from the dead. You don't want that same thing happening to you. It's not a good explanation. And that's why no scholar today that I'm aware of would offer it. All right, let's try to use a story using option 4. Jesus didn't rise from the dead. No, he had an identical twin brother. A twin brother. Who knew, right? But Jesus, yeah, he had a twin brother. Possible, right? Is it logically possible? Sure. He had a twin brother. Nobody knew about this twin brother. But then this brother, this tricky guy, he stole Jesus' body. I mean, he's been watching this whole thing, watching Jesus' ministry from the shadows for many, for 3 years. Never really getting to know anybody, just lurking around, right? Watching everything Jesus is doing, this twin brother. And then they kill him, and he gets the idea, well, I'm going to steal his body and then tell everybody that I'm back. I'm Jesus, and I've returned. Great idea. So, this twin brother stole Jesus' body from the tomb and pretended that he was Jesus to the disciples. Now, if you think this is crazy, guess what? This has been offered as a real option to consider. Anything but the resurrection. Please don't let Christianity be true. I mean, it would be horrible if Christianity was true, wouldn't it? I mean, that we should really love everybody from our neighbors to our enemies. Oh, horrible, horrible thing. Anything but Christianity, please. But no, let's not. If the resurrection is true, then that means that we should love all people from our neighbors to our enemies. So, since we don't want that, we don't want Jesus' teachings to be validated by the resurrection, well, maybe Jesus had a twin brother. But you see, that's not a good explanation because there's no evidence that Jesus had a twin brother. Number one, you got to make this up. This is called ad hoc. This is an ad hoc option here. You're just making it up. Making it up out of the blue. Is it possible? Sure. But like I said, possibilities come cheap and probabilities are much more expensive. We've got no reason to think that Jesus had a twin brother. And it would have been really hard to hide the fact that he had a twin brother from everybody. And why would anyone want to pretend to be a hated criminal that was just executed? Think about that. All right, his sneaky twin brother lurking around in the shadows all these years, watching what's going on, sees Jesus get executed. Again, go watch The Passion of the Christ to see how that went down. And then said, now I'm going to steal his body and claim to be the person they just executed. And if they find you, they're going to do the same thing to you. Would you do that if you were Jesus' twin brother? I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I wouldn't do that. That's the last thing I would want to do. In fact, I would run. And if anybody asked me if I was related to Jesus, I'd say, Jesus who? If I was that twin brother. The twin would have also had to be incredibly good at pretending to fool all the disciples who had been around him for every day, every moment for the last 3 years. And stealing this body would have been really hard also. And after 40 days, after going around and making these appearances, after 40 days, now he's just gone. Where'd he go? Not a good explanation. In fact, 8 is not really explained either. I think that's enough for today. We're going to continue this talk in our next lesson, so make sure you come back, and thank you for joining us.